space for exhibiting power, but not as a city or town with municipalities and local government. Extreme rituals like the beheading of rivals, as Sergio González Rodriguez shows, can then be viewed as a performative ritual designed to display the supremacy of the executioners. The narcos abolish politics. In its place, they replace it with a pyramidal structure at the summit of which is the capo. This conjunction of an archaic social order with drug traffic is explicitly reenacted in Yuri Herrera's novel Trabajos del Reino, one of the more interesting contributions to the growing literature from the North. Yuri Herrera, of course, needs no introduction, as he spoke here, I think, a few weeks ago, right? What is usually understood as narco-literature, and I'm not putting him into that category, tends to conform to adventure stories like Arturo Pérez Reverte's La Reina del Sur. Herrera's novel, on the contrary, depicts narco-culture as a throwback to something like the European Middle Ages. His protagonist is a singer of corridos and is known as Lobo until he is recruited by the king, the drug lord. And now known as El Artista, he lives in the king's court, along with the king's women, the members of the cartel, the servants, the journalist, La Bruja, and her daughter, La Cualquiera. The term feudalism does not appear far-fetched when considering this elaborate hierarchy and the power of death attributed to the overlord. In the novel's opening episode that takes place in a bar where the king summarily executes an annoying drunk, Herrera explicitly draws on an analogy with the European Middle Ages. The story is told from the point of view of Lobo, now employed as the court minstrel, the composer of praise songs, of ballads that commemorate the deeds of the leader, whose court includes warriors, fools, the minstrel, courtesans, and his appointed heir, El Heredero. Lobo's ballads are narco-corridos, a genre which, like all corridos, tells a story beautifully summarized in the opening lines of one of them, Contrabando y Traición, which depicts the traffickers as fallen heroes. Dicen que venían del sur en un carro colorado, traían 100 kilos de coca, iban rumbo a Chicago. Así lo dijo el soplón que los había denunciado. The corrido is a genre that substantiates the connection between the archaic and the postmodern that Segato underscored. At the very beginning of his novel, Herrera emphasizes the combination between the modern and the retro social organization. La única vez que Lobo fue al cine, vio una película donde aparecía otro hombre así, fuerte, suntuoso, con poder sobre las cosas del mundo, era un rey. The narco kingdom, situated just south of the border, is surrounded by the desert. Reventaban un confín del desierto en unas zonas vastísimos. Its inhabitants are designated not by patronyms, but by occupation or age, and include el artista, el joyero, la niña, la cualquiera, el periodista, and of course el traidor. Jousts are with guns, not with swords, and there are periodic audiencias in which people come to ask favors. For a while, the artist is happy to celebrate the king with his music, until he becomes the friend and lover of La Cualquiera, a girl whose mother, La Bruja, had been reserving her for the king. From an uncritical celebrant, he becomes an angry and also frightened man, especially when he is sent by the king to spy on a rival, which he takes as a sign of weakness and a lessening of the royal power. Whereas Segato talks of the conjunction of postmodernism and feudalism, Herrera focuses on the latter in order to expose the weakness of personal leadership, always endangered by rivalry and betrayal. It is only when he leaves the palace that he rediscovers real tragedies, including his own. Excuse me. While Yuri Herrera insists on the archaic nature of the narco-social order, other writers focus on its everyday horror, described in vivid detail by Carlos Velázquez in El Karma y Vivir al Norte. Velázquez's previous book, La Biblia Vaquera, Un triunfo del corrido sobre la lógica, invented a post-norteño region inhabited by dealers, DJs, narcos, piratas, santeros, vendedores ambulantes, y compositores de narcocorrido. In other words, a society that lives off traffic. His book is not so much a novel as an odd miscellany that suggests the difficulty of finding a genre that can convey the day-to-day shock of the hitherto unrecorded. El Karma de Vivir al Norte is written very much in the style of the Colombian Fernando Vallejo as a diatribe, and depicts a situation so extreme that it reduces him not to tears but to laughter. Set in Torreon, where extreme violence is the daily fare of its citizens, and where drinking to death is the only recreation, one of the chapters is headed Otra noche de mierda en esa puta ciudad, excuse my language, and another, Miedo y asco en el territorio Santos Modelo. It's impossible to live anything resembling an ordinary life in such circumstances. Vivir en Torreón se convirtió en la peor de las plagas. Desconfiaba de todos y todos. Desconfiaban de mí. Pensaba en comprarme una pistola. No deambulaba de noche. No visitaba bares ni cantinas. No frecuentaba a mis amigos. Mi contacto con el exterior se producía a través de las redes sociales. So what in most parts of the world counts as ordinary life has become a daily encounter with death. El crimen organizado había atacado la estación de policía, clínicas de rehabilitación, centros comerciales, bares, cantinas, bancos, funerarias, giros negros, pero nunca se había atrevido a atentar contra una institución tan lagunera como el negocio de Don Loco que vendía tortillones. And this actually ultimate taboo is now going to be destroyed. Ejecutaron a 3 personas en la puerta del establecimiento mientras lo asaltaba. Signo inequívoco de que nos estaba cargando la chingada. Coahuila rules. El narco estaba aniquilando nuestras tradiciones. Traditions are what binds communities. To annihilate them means extreme isolation, a consequence that the book continually underscores by showing what it's like to live in a narco community. Velázquez depicts a militarized city in which the ordinary citizens do not leave their home. El aislamiento se volvió tan dramático que la única forma en que el lagunero podía interactuar con la gente era a través de las redes sociales. A significant aside, given that social networks are generally represented as a utopian combination of friendship and technology, and here are depicted as a replacement for human contact that has become impossible. But however we evaluate this literature, it is clear that the literary avant-garde, once firmly established in Mexico City under the aegis of Octavio Paz and Carlos Fuentes, is now situated in this turbulent north, chronicled by writers such as Daniel Sada, Heriberto Yepes, Yuri Herrera, and Carlos Velázquez, and where women writers such as Rosina Conde and Rosario San Miguel have disrupted the stereotypes of womanhood and male power by depicting female characters who live and work in Ciudad Juarez, visit its bars, and are familiar with the risks of crossing the border to El Paso. It is now Tijuana, however, formerly the Sin City and tourist Mecca, where some of the most original and innovative writing has originated, a consequence perhaps of the federal investment in new universities, literary workshops, musical groups, and art exhibitions. But although it has been celebrated as a postmodern city, it is too contradictory, too violent to fit into that groove. Like the crossway quotation I cited at the beginning, Tijuana authors know that they live alongside the most powerful nation in the world, and half of Tijuana's population do not have the legal right to cross the border. That is why Heriberto Yepes, in his provocative essay, La hibridización es un engaño, el significado real del arte fronterizo, refutes Garcia Canclini's much-cited claim that Tijuana is a postmodern city and the poster city of hybridity. Yepes, whom the critic Christopher Dominguez calls a borderline guru, represents the frontier as an embezzled ontology that has not been considered in the grand narrative of capitalism. Yepes is an admirer of Horst Mattei Quelle, a German philosopher who taught at UNAM, and whom Yepes calls the most dangerous philosopher since Nietzsche, whose book El hombre y sus fronteras, una visión filosófica, gives a psychical as well as a geographical significance to La Frontera. Although I'm not sure that he would welcome the analogy, Yepes reminds me of D.H. Lawrence in his ambition to draw on pre-Hispanic culture in order to reinvent the human that is, as masculine. However, since I have not been able to acquire some crucial books and essays, I can only surmise that Yepes is the belated heir to a Mexican tradition of deploying pre-Columbian mythology in order to find an alternative to modern Malays, and whose most famous Mexican practitioner was Octavio Paz. What I want to highlight is not his philosophy as such, but the fact that he claims a pensamiento fronterizo that acknowledges a kinship with, but is also a critique of US writers, and particularly of the poet Charles Olson, who also looked to the pre-Columbian past for an alternative to Euro-American culture. Yepes is the author of a narco novel, Aborto, based on the assassination of presidential candidate Luis Donald Colosio in Tijuana in 1994, and also of El Otro Lado, whose cover picture shows a would-be illegal immigrant gazing at the fortified fence. Given the difficulty of finding his writings, there's not a single book by Yepes in the Columbian Library, a significant omission, and one that exposes the still dominant role of Mexico City and its book trade via its peripheries. Yepes' downright impudence in challenging the domination of the Mexico City intelligentsia, I apologize to any of the Mexico City intelligentsia here in this room, but it's only rivaled by that of another Tijuana native, Sayac Valencia, whose book, Capitalism Gore, dares to channel Marx through contemporary feminism. I'm deliberately sort of focusing on these very marginal and weird theorists because I think they're significant developments of this kind of daimyo culture, which is very much sort of hostile and different from Mexico City culture. In a postscript to her book, Sayac Valencia describes driving down Insurgentes in Tijuana with her sister when a truck carrying a package passes their car. As the truck bumps over potholes, the package comes undone and reveals a something. When she asks, "What is that?" her sister replied, "It's a man's body, Sayac. This is Tijuana," stressing the everydayness of violence and Tijuana's identification with it. Sayac's book is not only a lament for what has happened to northern Mexico, but an attempt to account for what she calls its sujetos endriagos. Endriago being a term taken from, of all things, novels of chivalry, Amadís de Gaula, to depict monsters, and that she uses